All right, well, thank you all for joining us today on a Friday afternoon. No better way I could be spending than talking about soil health, and especially soil health in our own backyard. So really excited for this conversation and getting to hear from this really great group of panelists. Have really a diverse group of experts on water quality and soil health and gardening. So just, I think we all have a lot to learn. So I'm excited about that. And we'll get started here in just a second. Looks like there's still a few folks coming in to the Zoom, and then we'll get going. All right, let's get rolling because I know we only have an hour and have a lot to cover. So I'm Mary Sketch Bryant, the coordinator of the Virginia Soil Health Coalition, and have also been working over the last year on the For the Soil Awareness Initiative, which is a campaign of the coalition to raise awareness about soil health and how we can all be for the soil and support the 4 principles of soil health. And I will put in the chat, but encourage you all to go check out forthesoil.org and take the pledge, pledging your support for soil health. And, we'll learn more today about how you don't have to be managing a large farm or operation to support soil health. You can do it in your own backyard. So again, that's forthesoil.org. But to get things started, I just want to go around to the panelists that we have here today and have you all introduce yourselves and a little bit about your connection to soil health in the urban context and why it matters to you. So I'm going to go around we'll start with you, Larry, because you're right to my left.
Okay. My name is Larry Newman. I'm a Master Gardener volunteer with the Cooperative Extension Service, and I work with Chesterfield County, which is in the Piedmont region of Virginia, for those of you that may not know. Professionally, I work in the road building industry with highway construction, and I focus primarily on erosion and sediment control and stormwater runoff. So erosion leads to sediment, which leads to water quality issues, and that's why soil health is very critical and important to me personally and professionally.
Thanks, Larry. And Shereen.
Hi, I'm Shereen Hughes. I'm Assistant Director of Wetlands Watch. It's a nonprofit in Norfolk, Virginia, in the coastal plain. And I'm the Virginia coordinator for the Chesapeake Bay Landscape Professional Program. And we train and are building a network and community of practice around sustainable landscaping practices and green infrastructure practices, primarily focused on the urban environment. And we promote the Chesapeake Conservation Landscaping Council's 8 essential elements of conservation landscaping, which include soil health, as well as selecting the appropriate plant materials and practices for a site based on soil conditions and other conditions that will influence that decision.
Thanks, Shereen. Kevin.
Yes, ma'am. I'm Kevin McLean. I'm the state coordinator of the Virginia Conservation Assistance Program, better known as VCAP. We have a small staff at the Virginia Association of Soil and Water Conservation Districts that oversees the program. But specifically, we work with staff at 47 individual soil and water conservation districts all across the state. And I believe very firmly that everyone can play some part in soil and water conservation, in conservation of our soil and our natural resources. And specifically with the VCAP program, our districts have a long and successful history of implementing agricultural cost share and doing environmental education. But VCAP has really been an opportunity to access more of your average homeowner, business owner, all that, and teach them some more about soil health and soil and water conservation, and really get the word about the work that we do out to a broader audience of people.
Thanks, Kevin. And Thomas.
Hi, I'm Thomas Bolles. I'm the agriculture agent up in Prince William County. We're a mostly suburban county, and although I do deal with ag producers, much of my work is with homeowners, and we work on improving turf, improving landscapes, with the idea of protecting the water quality of the water that's going into the bay.
Thanks, Thomas. And Duane.
Yeah, I'm Duane Moore, also from Prince William County. I work part-time for Prince William Soil and Water Conservation District. Nutrient management certified for agriculture and conservation plan certified in the state. Been a master gardener in Prince William County for almost 23 years. And about 2005, I started teaching the soils class to all the new incoming master gardeners. And just from all the learning I've done and all the items I've learned from being at the Soil and Water Conservation District for the last 4 years, I find that I've been able to massage that class to emphasize things like drainage, more nutrient management in the soil for helping the beneficials. And it's really important that everybody understand that most of the soils they're going to deal with in an urban and suburban environment are going to be modified. It's not going to be the original soil that you would get in an ag land. You're going to see more of the subsoils brought up, so your pHs are going to start changing. So on the water quality side of the house, I try to get people to not put down what they don't need to. You don't need to go by the Scott recommendation every year and dump fertilizer on your lawn starting in April. So we try to teach all the master gardeners or I do, that you get it right with the soil, and anything else they teach you in this class will be a piece of cake. So.
Thank you all. And Duane, jumping off of that point, I think we have these 4 core principles of soil health: keep the soil covered, minimize disturbance, maximize living roots, and energize with diversity. But, I think in hearing from all of you, it looks a little different in the urban and suburban context, how you're addressing those and what the concerns are. In the work that you're doing, whether it's as a master gardener or conservation technician, what are the common issues you're seeing in urban and suburban environments that are unique to those areas? And Duane, we'll start with you, since you mentioned some of that in your introduction.
Yeah, the unique thing is that a lot of homeowners, because like Thomas said, we're probably 2/3 of the county is suburban. We still have some very large farms, but they're all in the eastern end of the county. And the other problem we have in the county is that the soils change. You got Piedmont soil in the eastern end of the county and the western end of the county, or excuse me, Piedmont in the western end, and you have coastal plain type soils in the eastern end of the county. The eastern end of the county tends to have a lot of older homes. Some areas have newer homes. And one of the problems with, like I said, with the newer homes is that they've totally changed the soil that's there, that was originally there, because normally it's farmland or things like that. So that's why when I teach master gardeners and they're going out to people, the first thing you need to do is take a soil test, because you can't do anything with that. pH is the next thing. First of the things you need to get right. Once you get that right, things start straightening out somewhat on their own. Then you do your nutrients, but you also have to look at drainage and what's going on with drainage. Because one of the things you want to do is, if you can open that drainage up when you do get these rain events, like we've had, you tend to absorb more of that water, and you keep that water on site. So when you do get into a drought condition, as long as you keep your grass at about 4 inches, because you don't need to mow it like a golf course, or if you have garden beds, keep them mulch really nice, you're not going to have the same effects. We went dry last July, and during that time, my lawn and my pastures didn't have any problems, because I tend to try work on them quite a bit. A lot of people want to have golf course lawn. Sometimes it doesn't always work. And you might just deal with what you have. A lot of them, I tell them, if you have a backyard, a lot of times in new houses, the backyards aren't done. So what we try to do is I tell them, you can use, since summertime's not the best time to plant your grass, since you want to do that in probably like early September, I usually use Labor Day as a marker, so you can get a good root base on that. I tend to tell them to put in some cover crops in the backyard to start it off. Beds, a lot of times you're going to want to go with some kind of raised bed in the garden, in the yard. And in the urban environment, even the suburban environment, a lot more people want to grow vegetables now because of COVID. Everybody wants their own food. So it becomes really imperative that they get the soils right, and they get as much organic matter in there get as much natural processes going. For one, it'll save them a lot of money. Two, it helps the environment because you're not putting down fertilizer you don't need, which tends to mostly run off. And I noticed, Mary, one of the things you had asked about was what they could do for the community. A lot of them, what they can do for the community is go to your HOA if you have one, try to figure out what that landscape contractor's kind of do, because it's not unusual to see those guys at certain times of the year spreading fertilizer, whether I'm not sure if they even need it or not. But, you know, it's from the community side, you want to have people go and ask, hey, are you guys taking soil tests before you do this? And are you putting the soil where it needs to, or putting the fertilizers where it needs to be? Because a lot of times it ends up on the sidewalk and in the street. And we all know where that ends up at. That ends up in the bay. So.
And following up on that, there's, so many great pieces in there, Duane, you know, and you mentioned soil testing. And, you know, I think a lot of people think, well, I don't own a farm. Why would I need to test my soil? And would love to, you know, hear, why should urban landowners or master gardeners test their soils? Larry and Thomas, you know, I know there's soil testing through extension. Are you seeing increased interest in soil testing, and why should everyone test their soils?
Well,
go ahead, Larry.
First, it's the least expensive and best thing you can do for your lawn or landscape. The lab that we use is in Chesterfield Airport. It's Waypoint Analytical. They didn't pay me to say that. I'm just volunteering that information. But they have what's called an S1 and an S3. S1 test is your very basic test, which is $9.50. Their S3, which measures the full 16 micro and micro elements as well as your sodium content, that's around 17 bucks. So tell me where you can buy a bag of fertilizer for 17 bucks. You can't do it. So it's the least expensive and best thing you can do for your lawn and landscape. I'll say it again. And the other thing is, if you don't, you're just guessing. You have to have a baseline or a benchmark to start with. If you apply the same seed, the same lime, the same fertilizer at the same time every year and expect something else other than the same, you're only kidding yourself. So you have to have a baseline to start, and that's why soil test is really important. As far as seeing more people doing it, I only work with people who voluntarily apply for the grassroots program. So out in the community, no, I don't know that there's any increase. There is an increase in awareness of people wanting to have a healthier lawn, a healthier community. But as far as the soil test, I don't think that piece of information is getting out there like we want it to.
I would agree with that. We haven't really seen a big tick in soil testing. And for those of you who aren't local to Chesterfield, you can get your soil tested through Virginia Tech for about 10 bucks. And to echo on you know, Larry's point, you need to have that baseline. You need to know what you need. And especially in urban and suburban soils, a lot of times the pH is really low. And if you have the wrong pH, you can have nutrients locked up. So it doesn't matter how much of that nutrient you add, it's all locked up and it's not plant available. So, you know, for 10 to 20 bucks to be able to get your soil right to start, it's a pretty good deal.
The biggest problem that I'm seeing is soil compaction in the urban, you know, just, and that was touched on earlier, I think, you know, about the soils are imported or manipulated. They're not native or in situ soil that was there. A lot of times, you know, it's trees removed and then the topsoil is stripped. The house is constructed and the topsoil is taken to a place which will sell it back to you, but not put back on your lawn. The thing that it always amazes me that and you can look this up, folks who are out there in the audience, called Liebig's Law, L-I-E-B-I-G. I think it's Liebig's Law. And that was in the 1820s, so almost 200 years ago, where a plant's yield is proportionate to its least available element or limiting factor. And that includes oxygen and moisture, which compaction is your number one enemy of moisture and oxygen. It can't get to the roots if you have dense and compact soil. So it doesn't matter if you have dense and compact soil. I don't care how much nitrogen you pound it with. it's not going to make any difference. Part of that soil test also works with what's called your cation saturation, your cation base saturation. And it tells you your nutrient balance, your calcium, your magnesium, your potassium, and your hydrogen. And if you manipulate one, you change another, but you can change it to the positive, but you won't know what type of lime to use. You won't know what type of fertility to add, like in this case, which is potassium. If you need to add more potassium, you will not know that if you do not have your soil tested. So I keep going back, to two things I learned in this business is healthy soil equals healthy plants, and don't guess soil test. If you don't remember anything else I've said today, which I'm sure most of you won't, just try to remember those two things. Don't guess soil tests, and healthy soil equals healthy plants. Thanks,
Larry and Thomas. And Larry, you mentioned again the compaction issue, and that is a really big topic in urban and suburban areas. And Shereen, you mentioned that originally, and you also mentioned that soil health is one of those 8 principles. How are you addressing soil health through the Chesapeake Bay Landscape Professionals and compaction? What can you do in your own yard?
Well, we mainly work with landscape professionals, and we train at a higher level, not necessarily working with the homeowner themselves. And I guess I would start by saying we don't encourage lawn where lawn doesn't belong. And I think too many times, in fact, the reason I got into this training in the first place was we had people trying to mow wetlands in their backyard and establish lawns in wet areas, and it just isn't the right place to do it. So in terms of soil health, we start with what is the purpose and use of the site, and what constitutes a healthy soil for that use. So if the use of the site is you want to infiltrate water and soak it in, spread it out, and you want to eliminate sedimentation and erosion, then make sure you cover the soil with plant materials. And make sure that it has that infiltration capacity. So if you need to amend the soil to improve the infiltration capacity, do so. If you're installing a stormwater practice, make sure that you're actually testing for permeability and infiltration capacity at the right place. So don't test at the surface, dig down to wherever it is you're going to install a rain garden, and evaluate whether you have A or B soils, whether you have wetland soils, not just what are the nutrients in the soil. And then from the native plant perspective, we encourage selection of locally native plants based on reference natural communities within the area. So if you have a natural community, plants, soils, and all the conditions that make up the natural community, look at your site and see if there's a similar conditions and natural communities close to your site, and then design your landscape based on using those native plants that are suitable for the site as the conditions are. So we're not necessarily, you may have a client that is designing a vegetable garden, but I've seen people put too much nutrients into their soil and then plant native plants that like really kind of harsh conditions, and the native plants get too big, they get diseased because they're too vigorous. So sometimes you can actually use the soils to limit plant growth and limit invasiveness. The other thing we promote is covering soil instead of just using mulch. If you're going to use mulch, use compost mulch, but instead of just using mulch, hardwood mulch, use a green ground cover. So plant a ground cover that will cover the soil layer and keep the invasive species down. Reduce the competition of invasive species. And Kevin has been through our training. So Kevin, if I've forgotten anything, please please let me know. The other thing I would say is we actually, in our advanced training, we have a whole session on soil protection during construction and even planning for soil protection to reduce compaction, reduce loss of soil, reduce erosion, and provide erosion sediment control. We also talk a lot about protecting soils around the root structures of the trees, because too often we don't take care of our trees, and our trees help provide healthy soil. And then we also talk about the healthy soil food web. So, you know, managing your soil in a healthy way.
And Shereen, you mentioned a lot about native plants, and are there resources where people can find out what in their region, what is native? And because I'm sure it differs a little bit across Virginia and what makes the most sense. Yeah, the state actually has a whole site and a reference on native plant communities, on natural communities in the state of Virginia based on the location. We have the Native Plant Atlas, and also there are a number of regional native plant guides that have been developed by the Coastal Zone Management Program, and I can put a link to that as well. So I'll put those links, those 3 resources. Great, and I'll work on compiling all the links. I think there's gonna be a lot of great resources shared today, and can share that out with everyone afterwards as well. And Kevin, wanted to jump over to you and follow up some on what Shereen said. You know, she mentioned stormwater management and different practices to address that, and you coordinate the VCAP program. And I know there's a heavy water quality focus within there. And, you know, would love to hear from you really what that intersection of soil health and water quality is, and how you're working with landowners to address both of those pieces.
Absolutely. And that's a really good segue into the direction this conversation is going. That, VCAP as a program, our mandate is specifically to reduce, total stormwater runoff from the property, into the tributaries that find their way into the Chesapeake Bay, and also to reduce the nutrients and the sediment that's running off with that water. And we report that and measure it in all sorts of different ways, and are required to meet certain standards and get X number of stormwater best management practices installed and everything. But what we find is that I come from a background of education, working in parks, doing interpretation and everything. So that kind of underlies everything that I tend to do, working in conservation. And there's really, in 2 huge ways, soil health is really important to what we do. The first being, Larry hit on it right off the front, at the start. The average homeowner, I know there's no such thing, but someone who owns a home, isn't in the conservation field, oftentimes does not realize the condition of the soils on their property, that all the topsoil has been scraped away, that, maybe just some sod was laid down when the house was built, and that just digging a hole and putting a plant in it is probably not going to succeed and really not have much impact on improving the soil. So we do a lot of education on that front. For the first huge reason being, we hope that once we help them with the specific stormwater issue they're trying to address, and get this nice project installed that typically includes native plants, we want those to succeed. We hope that they're going to take that information and continue to use it across the whole landscape of their property, and talk to their neighbors about it, and talk to their various communities about it, and kind of spread that message a little bit. And then the second part is that for us, it's a really wise, essentially financial investment for us to make sure that people are understanding the importance of soil health, improving the soil on their property, and using native plants, so that our projects succeed. We don't want to be spending all this grant money, overseeing all these projects, rain gardens, conservation landscaping, bioretentions, whatever, where we're not adequately addressing the soil conditions there, so that all those plants will survive and the project will succeed, and then they can see that reduction in total runoff. So we really do focus on that a lot. We all, most of our districts partner with Cooperative Extension to get those soil samples taken. Our district staff will help with infiltration tests, all those types of things. And of course, every project that comes in, our steering committee is looking over those to make sure that they've addressed the conditions on the site and that, it's going to work. And I will say one kind of bigger issue with soil conditions in general that we've had to deal with that wasn't necessarily anticipated is there are other non-vegetated practices that we do that have become very popular, permeable pavement being the number one thing, which is great. We're getting stormwater back into the ground, keeping it from running off, but preventing extensive soil compaction on the rest of the property while getting a stormwater practice like that installed is a big uphill battle. So that's something that maybe we didn't expect to be such a big need, but so we find ourselves doing education with contractors and folks like that as well, to really kind of spread that message.
Thanks, Kevin. And, and hearing your background in education, I think really all of your work has a huge educational component. It's sharing what practices do work in urban and suburban areas, whether it's as a master gardener or as a landscape professional. And I think thinking for myself as an urban landowner, an urban resident, it can be really overwhelming to think about what you can do in your backyard and how to pH, runoff, native plants. And this would be a question for all of you. How do you bridge that gap and, start somewhere? What's the starting point with folks?
Soil testing.
Yeah, soil testing.
In going back, Larry and Thomas, to that soil testing question, what are the big, I know when you get a soil test back from, whether it's the Virginia Tech Soil Testing Lab or Larry from Waypoint Analytical, there's a lot of numbers you're getting.
Right.
What should people be looking for? What's the most important?
Well, pH is critical. Soil organic matter is critical, and your base saturation or calculated saturation, which is your calcium, magnesium, hydrogen, and potassium levels. You want to get those balanced. Calcium magnesium ratio out of that is the most critical. You need much more calcium in the landscape than you do magnesium. Magnesium is a much smaller element. It is why some of your soil is so compact. So if you can reduce that magnesium and increase your calcium, and you do that with lime, but again, which type of lime? Dolomitic lime is a magnesium base, or calcitic lime is your calcium base. So you have to apply the right lime, and you can get benefits of both. But again, that soil test will tell you which to apply. But the best, before I would be willing to help, or actually before I would be willing to work with a client, the very first thing we have to do is run a soil test.
Yeah, I think for me, pH and cation exchange capacity, which goes to base saturation and all that. I don't worry so much with organic matter because in urban and suburban soils, there's not enough organic matter, especially in some of these lots where the topsoil has been scraped off and you're dealing with subsoil or imported fill. There's just not enough organic matter. And so it's just a matter of, for me, after getting a soil test, the number one thing to do is to add compost to increase the organic matter in the soil.
Yeah, you can also, one of the things is after you get that soil test is the drainage. I know a couple people talked about that. One of the things that I teach the master gardeners to use, and it's easy homeowner, is we have a little test you can do where you dig a 12-inch by 12-inch, a hole, 12 inches deep, fill it with a gallon of water, let that drain off, and stick another gallon of water in and see where you're at in 12 hours. If you start having issues where you're not, all that water to drain off, then you have an issue potentially. The problem with homeowners in urban areas is that really only outside of planting cover crops, which a lot of homeowner associations don't like cover crops, are in their front yards. Backyards, they can get away with it a lot of times. But they got to just use a core aerator. You always want to use a core aerator because you want to pop those cores out to try to get at least in the top 4 inches of soil, getting it loosened up. I mean, obviously, you're not going to bring a ripper through the neighborhood like you would use subsoil or like you would use in agriculture. But, we kind of tell them that get a couple of your neighbors together, 2 or 3, 4 neighbors, and go rent a core aerator for the day and just do your front yard and backyard. In the fall, I usually like to do it. The soil's a little bit wet, damp, but not wet, so that it's mud clogs all over. And do it before you fertilize, or if you're putting down any lime, to do it, to get it into the soil a little deeper. And even just loosening that up, because a lot of people ask about okay, I work around with the spiked shoes. I said, that's not good, because what that's doing is adding more compaction. Because all you're doing is you're not removing that core to allow it to breathe out. And the roots, depending on what type of with like clover and some of the fescues, bluegrass and that, the roots don't go down that far. They were never designed to go down that far, because we tend to have wetter soils here than they do out in the plains. And the more you can loosen it up, at least to start it with. But you're always going to have to assume that if you're in a new house, that there was all kinds of heavy equipment running on that property. And the compaction is going to be pretty hard, and it's going to take time. The other thing you can do is raise beds. If you're going to do flowers, bushes, or a garden, you want to put a raised bed in. Best way to do that is to just start. You can give it garden soil, or if you can get somebody to deliver some, just start building your beds. If you have leaves in the area, or you get hold of leaves, you can always rake those over near the beds, take a lawnmower, chop them up and throw them on the beds. So anything you can do to help enhance that, and then put the mulch, not the big chunks, but the little shredded mulch on there for it. Like was mentioned earlier, you can put different types of covers underneath bushes too. Cover crops that are living cover crops, or living plants underneath the bushes. Some of the shorter ones that can handle it, which look nice, keep the soil moist, and help the bushes survive. So it's just hard for the urban, especially for urban, because like I said, a lot of people want to start growing gardens now, and growing vegetables in their backyard, and they're expecting they're going to grow these vegetables are going to look like what they get at the store. When these people are planting 1,000 plants to get that one great tomato out of it, or that one great pepper out of it, or cucumber. So it's just one of those things. It can be hard, but it can also be easy, and it can be beneficial once you get there. It might take you a few years to get there, which is what a lot of people have to understand. This is not an overnight process, getting the soil back, because it's really been abused in a lot of cases. If you're in an urban environment, no telling what was torn up off of it, whether it was a construction site or whatever, if you have it. If it's a house that's been there, or a townhouse that's been there for a long time in an urban environment, backyard might be totally a mess. You might not have sun or anything like that. So you kind of have to deal with what you have. I think once people understand that if they can get the soil correct, they can start absorbing the moisture that comes in from the atmosphere, and they won't get as much runoff. Although Kevin has some great programs there, because we've instituted some here in the county through Mike Miller at the Soil and Water Office, a colleague. And we've put a lot of rain gardens in, because and most of what we deal with in the urban environment is going to be runoff or erosion type issues, where the houses were, because there's some areas where, I don't know, it's more of if you go into eastern Prince William County and you go down around Williamsburg or in those areas, I mean, the land looks exactly the same. They got these big gullies running through the whole areas and all of that. So definitely houses should not have been built there in the first place, but, or a long time ago. But I agree with Larry and Thomas that soil test #1, and look at your pH is going to be the first thing on there you're really interested in.
There's a few questions coming in the chat, but I also wanted to, Shereen, you mentioned you're also looking at your soil texture analysis, and if you just could mention a little more how to do that and why.
Yeah, we actually have soil samples, and we do this in a training with our professionals, where we teach them how to grab a soil sample and wet it, and you can do different, try and form a ball. I think Kansas, we have like texture analysis guidance from University of Kansas.
It's K-State.
Thank you. And so, it's very tactile, and it's important because soil texture also, besides compaction, soil texture determines how permeable your soil is. And so if you have a soil that's full of clay, you're going to know pretty quickly that it's not going to infiltrate very well. And that would be an area where you would want to add organic matter, because the clay particles stick to the organic matter and increase the infiltration capacity, but it's still may not be suitable for what, you know, an infiltration type practice, for instance. And there's a really simple method that I like that a homeowner can do, where they go and they grab soil samples and they throw it into a mason jar, put water in it, shake it up, and then just let it settle overnight. And you can see the particles that settle out, and even gradation in color. So you can, you know, the organic matter's usually a much richer color than the rest of the soil. Oh, thanks. Thanks, Thomas.
Sure.
Yeah, it's just so simple. And so, you know, if you're not a real tactile person, just do something like that. And then basically you can see the percentage of sand, silt, clay, and organic matter. And I also put in there, I learned that from Landscapes for Life program. It was a program developed by, I think, the National Botanical Gardens and the Sustainable Sites groups, and it was geared towards homeowners. And a lot of extensions actually run those programs, and you can, if you don't, you can get certified to run them. And it's a nice series. And so anyway, I put that there as well.
It's a wonderful resource. And I love the mason jar idea, because I think anything that is easy that you could go do right now is great. Which, you know, thinking of right now, another question I have is there a time of year when folks should be thinking more about this and working more on this? You know, I think everyone thinks spring, but then fall for lawn care management is big too.
Mary, I'll jump on that one. That's a really good question, because immediacy is that's an issue we deal with a lot, both in that if someone's having a stormwater issue, you know, we don't necessarily solve flooding issues, but like an aerial flooding type of issue, they want it fixed immediately, you know, and that makes sense as a homeowner, as a property owner. But they also, beyond that, we often see folks, you know, they want immediately a full garden, a full, you know, vegetated practice. They want a full project. They want their soil fixed, you know, and so again, that's part of not just talking about time of year, which yes, we see big spring spikes, because that's when everyone start coming out of their homes at the end of winter. They start really thinking about those things. And then we see a big fall spike as well, which is when we really encourage folks to do a lot of the vegetative plantings. But, you know, that they want to see immediate fixes, and it takes a lot of time working with folks for them to understand that not only is the process of doing it, installing it is going to take time, but when you talk about these sites that, you know, where all the topsoil and then some has been removed, you know, that took at least hundreds of years to be deposited there, to evolve there. And it's not, you know, there's a lot of things we can do to accelerate its return to a good soil health condition and really work it and get it back in a good condition, but that's just not going to happen immediately. And we also, you know, we are really pushing people towards seedlings and bare root stock and stuff like that, you know, where people, they want to get the $500, you know, tree that's already 3 inches in diameter or whatever. And so again, it comes back to helping folks understand that these kinds of landscapes and the soil that go with them, you know, we can help return them to a more natural condition, but it's going to take some time for that organic material to keep dropping off of that vegetation and keep working it back into the soil. And Duane kind of hinted at it too. You know, sometimes we do get the folks that they want to bring in the heavy equipment and, you know, excavate the whole yard and bring in, you know, new soil and everything. And we tend to really steer away from that, just because the costs and the things that can go wrong when you start working on that kind of scale can be really significant. So it is more a matter of picking the right time of year, understanding the timeline that it's going to take, and the continued work that it's going to take. Because that's another key part of it, is people also often want, you know, my BMP or my garden or whatever was installed, and now the problem is fixed, it's over, you know. And that's also not how it works. You know, I mean, our projects come with a 10-year lifespan agreement, you know, a minimum to maintain them and keep them functioning. But really from start to finish, you got to be working with folks, especially if they're not familiar with these types of things, that it's not going to be hands off. It's not going to be one and done, and then you just walk away from it and your problem's fixed. You're going to keep working on these things and keep improving the whole landscape there on your property.
Yeah, I would say that client expectation management in the urban and suburban setting is huge.
Yeah.
I was just kind of remembering, I had a new property in Centerville before I moved to Williamsburg. And one of the ways I started managing in the fall for the spring was I put down cardboard. I actually put it down right on top of turf and then just covered it with mulch. And I let it just percolate and over the winter and into the early spring. And then I went back in and punched holes through it and planted through it. And, you know, just, it was a way to add organic matter, and the turf, you know, has organic matter associated with it, all the roots and everything decomposed. So that was an easy thing to do. And when I moved to my property here in Williamsburg, the area was just mowed and mowed and mowed down to the quick, and there was exposed soil, and so I have tons of trees and tons of leaves, and I just started piling those areas with leaves and killing off the turf and watching and monitoring what came up naturally. What wanted to be there. And I found a lot of native plants were really happy to come back to that area once I stopped mowing it. And so I would say that the soil is really improving tremendously just by allowing the mulch to degrade over time and then allowing the native plants to come back. And I would just say, it's really, to me, I just monitor my whole property for what is native and natural and easily growing on my site already. And then, you know, selectively choose areas for turf and use a zoysia, which is just it grows through anything in the really rocky areas. And then in the front, I have all native ground covers that have come up over time under oak trees, where you're going to have a hard time getting turf to grow. People just try to grow lawns here and it just fails. So once again, thinking about what is suitable for your site. And there are some native grasses and low growing perennials that will grow really well under oak trees. So thinking about that and managing aesthetics. But I know in the urban, mainly the suburban areas where the lawn is king, I know there's a lot that you guys are fighting, but from a professional perspective, we are really fighting that because the turf is like the biggest input of nutrients and runoff besides the impervious surfaces that we're trying to manage and control. So we really promote urban nutrient management, and Chesapeake Stormwater Network has like the 10 steps for a homeowner to manage turf on their property, and collecting soil sample is one of them, covering eroding soil is another, mowing high. And I do know that there has been also some research, University of Maryland's done research with using native grasses, and they find that their roots are much deeper and actually start improving the soils. So I think we can try and be more creative too. But it can be an uphill battle. I do know that.
Yeah, in the suburban setting, HOAs are, because there's always that one person on the HOA landscape board who's lived somewhere else where they can grow grass really well and doesn't understand transition zone grass, doesn't understand that you can't grow grass under trees. And that is an uphill fight.
Yeah.
one of the questions in the chat, kind of on that point, because many of you have mentioned organic matter, and is, what is kind of what is an acceptable organic matter level in soil? And I know, and I think Thomas, it was you that mentioned this, that it's hard in urban suburban settings because the baselines vary so much because of all it's not a natural setting compared to maybe some more rural areas. But, I guess, what can you expect to see change over time if you're adding compost, if you're doing practices for healthy soils?
Well, I think a lot of it depends on the crop, if you will, and the management. In a wooded area where you're letting that organic matter accumulate naturally, you're going to see much higher organic matters. If you're talking about a lawn where people aren't leaving the clippings, you're going to see organic matter deplete much more quickly.
Yeah, Mary, you were asking about the number. Usually the numbers are around 5 or 6% organic matter, which is really hard to get to. Yeah. Most people are going to be down in the 2 to 3%. One thing with the organic matter is, like on a lawn, you can actually spread compost over an active lawn. Just kind of throw it out with a shovel. One of the things that, talking about HOAs, people that want to have their own compost piles, they need to check the HOA regulations before they start. Because a lot of HOAs and a lot of people, I mean, here in Prince William County at one of our facilities, our Bolles Ford facility, they have a giant composting facility. And if you go by there in the spring where they have a lot of grass clippings, because everybody did fertilize their lawn and all they're doing is mowing because it's raining, it really stinks. And it's because they're out of bounds. They don't have the ratios correct. The 3 brown, the 1, and they're bringing in all of the Fairfax County, and it tends to get, I think one of the reasons that they don't like compost piles is because 1, people don't know how to manage them. 2, they put food scraps and whatever, think we can just throw everything in there. And then next thing you know, the neighborhood doesn't just have cats and dogs, but it has rats and possums and snakes and all kinds of things that people don't like. So they need to check with that first. But compost is a great way to do it. There's composting facilities. You can go to garden centers and get it from them. You can buy it in bulk if you have a friend or somebody with a pickup truck and get a load and bring it in. But on a new lawn, you can get it and work it in if you can. And you can put down probably a couple inches or so and work it in to just start it before you're doing your new lawn. Mm-hmm. And like you were asking about for the timing, it's the fall is the best time to start the lawn. Like I said, around Labor Day is what most farmers actually do on their pastures. Any work they're going to do is usually in the fall. So if they're doing that for their crops and their hay fields and their pastures, that it's probably the same as you want to do for your yard. Plus,
depends on what yours too. If you have fescue grass, Duane is exactly right. Fescue and rye and bluegrass, that would definitely be. Yeah, zoysia, as Shereen mentioned, or if you have Bermuda, that's exactly the opposite. You need to do that in the spring. It's called a warm season grass. The question about organic matter, all goes back to your soil test. Your cation exchange capacity is going to dictate to you what your organic matter is going to be. Everybody loves that 5% number, but if you have CECs down in the 4 and 5 range, this means you have a very sandy soil. You're never going to have 5% organic matter. It's not going to happen. It's going to leach through. So you have to work with what you have, which goes back to what Shereen was saying. What you have is what you have, and the texture you can't change the texture. You can improve the structure, and I encourage people to work on the structure, but you can't change the texture unless you bring in the heavy equipment, like Kevin was saying. Which in the road building industry, I wholeheartedly encourage heavy equipment in the lawn. No problem at all. But that's just a joke. Please don't take me serious on that. No, you can't change the texture unless you physically remove it and bring something else in, which that's just not. It's not feasible to do that, but you can improve the structure. It all goes back to the soil test. I just can't say it enough. Spend the $10, find out what you have, and then go from there. But the one thing I want to leave on is, it's your money, it's your yard. I'm a private property rights advocate. I want you to do what you want to on your lawn, but just don't hurt the guy downstream, because unless you live on the top of Mount Rogers, you live downstream of somebody and you live upstream of somebody. So be careful what you do, because sediment can't read. It doesn't know where the property line is. It just knows I'm going to travel until gravity or something physical takes over for me to settle out or stop. So also the thing I want to tell you is, according to the United States EPA and USDA, the #1 water quality pollutant in America is still sediment. It's still dirt. Runoff of soil is absolutely the largest impediment to water quality we have. So if you don't have erosion, you don't have sediment. And that's, again, that's what I tell folks, is it's all about ground cover. It's all about having a healthy soil, because healthy soil equals healthy plants, and that stops your runoff. So
I just add, that reminds me, besides, we've just been talking about water quality, but we should also be talking about water quantity, and healthy soils that infiltrate
Yes.
water runoff can reduce flooding downstream as well. So, it is important. We really focus on the new way of managing stormwater is all about managing stormwater as close to where it falls as you can. And so, and you're not just managing for sediment, nitrogen and phosphorus, but you're managing for quantity. And as we talk about flooding, we're just more and more localities and people are getting flooded, and our flood zones are expanding, and we're having more destructive floods. So managing the water from a quantity perspective is another really important thing to think about.
Also, if you can get that water to infiltrate, a lot of places, especially in urban and suburban areas, you're paying for your water. So if you can get that free rainwater down there and get it into the ground, not only are you going to stop that flooding, and there's a lot more impervious surfaces now, which it causes a lot of problems with that. And matter of fact, we've got at least one person in our VCAP program here in Prince William County that their problem was caused by a neighbor 3 houses up. And the county had come in and told them to change what they had done. And they changed it. As soon as the county came back and looked at it, they changed it back again. So we were trying to help them because the contractors don't always go in and say, oh, this is a nice level piece of land, this will be good. If they can build it on the side of a mountain, they will. So it's just one of those things that people have to be really aware of. Like Larry said, what's upstream, but also what's downstream.
Thank you all. And there is one more question in the chat that I wanted to touch on, because I don't know anything about this. And it says the threat to our soils is the invasive jumping worms. Anyone working to prevent or get rid of these? Are they in Virginia? Does anyone have any insight on that?
There are some in Virginia. USDA is working on the issue. I haven't heard anything recently, but I think it was last year they were found. I know they were found in Virginia.
Okay, great.
They're not widespread though. I mean, just, don't everyone panic that they're in Virginia. They're not that widespread, but they have been seen in Virginia.
Okay, great. Thank you. And I know there's been a lot of great resources being put in the chat. And so thank you all. And we're running out of time here, but just wanted to do a quick round robin if there's, where folks can get in touch with the programs you work with, or, if they're interested in doing more on their lawn and their garden to manage that. We'll start with Shereen.
Actually, I put the programs in the chat, and CBLP has over 800 certified professionals in the Chesapeake Bay region. And we have an online database. So if you're looking for a professional that's going to think in that way, and many soil and water conservation district agents that run the VCAP program are certified as well. So, but if you're interested, I'll also put my email address in the chat.
Oh, wonderful. And Duane, any resources that you would recommend?
I think the best one to start with is your local extension office. That's going to be the people that can help you, especially if you're in urban and suburban, and people may not know it, but Fairfax County, not only Fairfax, but Alexandria and Arlington counties, and up in those areas, they do have agents available to them. And that's where you're going to get your soil test information. Also, Virginia Tech has a lot of pamphlets you can pull out. Virginia State also has extension. They've got pamphlets you can pull out and look at it for your lawns. And soil and water, the thing with us is we predominantly do agriculture. We pass that off to the extension office. And I know Prince William County, and Thomas may talk about this, has a best lawns program where you can actually have somebody come out and help you with your soil test and help you interpret it and give you somebody plus they build a conservation plan for you, lawn management plan like we do for our farmers.
Great, thank you. And Thomas, anything to add to that about the programs in Prince William or otherwhere?
There are 13 counties, I believe, that have urban nutrient management plans within extension. Larry's part of one. Our county has one. They're mostly located in the central, eastern, northern part of the state. But your cooperative extension agent can help you with lawn landscape care. And if there's something that they don't know, they can always reach back to professionals at Virginia Tech or Virginia State or any of the research stations.
Wonderful, thank you. And Kevin, where can people find out more about the VCAP program?
Absolutely. I dropped the VCAP webpage in the chat. It's a little bit further back, but hopefully when you kind of compile everything, it'll be there. I also dropped my email in there. I'm a great place to start on our staff at the association, but of course, we've got staff at every soil and water district across the state that can help with that. And I will say, Mary and I were talking about this before we officially got started. A few of our largest urban areas in Virginia, our biggest cities, do not belong to soil and water conservation districts because of our history working in ag. And they just didn't establish districts there way back when. We are working on some agreements with some of those localities. But if you contact me and say, I live in City of Richmond, and I say they're not in a district right now, but here are X, Y, and Z other organizations that can help you and maybe come out to your site and assist you and everything. And it's going to be a lot of the groups we talked about today, and then some others, more local to that area. But I'm always a great place to start.
Great, thank you. And Larry, any resources that you recommend?
Well, if you're a Chesterfield County resident, it's been mentioned by others. It's a grassroots program, which is, again, Henrico County has a smart lawn program, but it's for homeowners who want to improve the quality of their lawn. It's less than $30. You just go online and sign up. A lot of the extension offices are still not taking in customers, or clients, we'll call them. So you can call, but you can always use the website, which is ext.vt.edu, extension.vt.edu. And so I also tell folks YouTube is your friend at some point, but be very, very careful. Some very well-intended people don't always pass out the best information. So be very careful. If you do any searches, make sure the site ends in .edu. Land Grant University specifically. And finally, I want to say we got a new ball coach in Blacksburg, so go Hokies.
An important last plug in there. Well, thank you all so much. This has been so great, and I'm going to compile all these resources and get it on the Virginia Soil Health Coalition website. And so we'll make sure and share that link out, and with everyone registered and with our network. And check out the coalition website at virginiasoilhealth.org, and For the Soil at forthesoil.org, where you can take the pledge. Check out a new podcast that comes out every 2 weeks, so the second and fourth Tuesday of the month, and we're hoping to get more content on there around this same topic. So send us questions you have that you want covered on that podcast, and we'll work on getting more content out. But thank you all so much, and have a great Friday.
Thanks, Mary. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.
Mary.